Hey guys, what's going on? It's your boy Luke here for our Monday Night Football live stream for the Titans versus Bills game. And here, what we're going to do on the stream is we're going to go through some of the weather for tonight. We're going to go through any of the injuries that have spotted up throughout the week, and of course, go through our player poll as well. So, going to go ahead and start off with a little bit of a weather report. So, going to go ahead and share my screen here. Cool. Let's get over to the weather side of things. So for tonight, we're obviously dealing with a non-dome, dealing with an open-air stadium. So anytime we have that in play, definitely at least want to check the weather radar, make sure nothing crazy is going on. And tonight over in Tennessee, nothing of note, right? You have 60-degree weather, 57 the whole night, hardly any wind at all, gusts up to a whopping 6 miles an hour. Also a 0% chance of rain the entire night. So overall, nothing crazy going on with the weather there. But obviously, just want to make sure we go over that here on the stream. In terms of our game flow, in terms of the spread, everything like that, we've seen a little bit of movement since I first made this video over on Saturday. So first of all, the spread has moved from 5 points to 6 for the Buffalo Bills. We've also seen the over-under go up 1 point. So from 52.5 to 53.5. Again, that 1 point built into the Bills side of things. So in terms of injury players, we already talked about it. Buffalo Bills, no injuries for this week, which is definitely one of the rare sights in all of football right now. But on the Titans side of things, they were dealing with quite a few injuries, but just to this point in the year, they've gotten Julio Jones back, gotten A.J. Brown, expected to suit up tonight as well. You can see he's still listed as questionable. That is of today, actually still questionable, but expected to suit up. Has at least been at practice this week. Christian Fulton, who's put on IR as of today, we already knew he likely wasn't going to play. And a few other guys on this team banged up, but all expected to play. So overall, one of the lower injury games on the entire slate, which is great to see for both organizations there. What I want to do now is I'm going to hop right into the projections, so not waste any time here for you guys. So we have our Patreon projections right here, and I'm reminding you guys, if you aren't already a member of the NFL Patreon page, highly recommend that you guys go ahead and join. On there, so we can get access to my projections for every player this week. So not just for the showdown slates, for the main slates, everything like that. This is part of the Patreon projections that you're seeing right here on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and start going through the poll right here. So first of all, expect this to be a relatively high-scoring game. We see that reflected with the over-under there at 53.5 points. Also expect the Bills to be highly productive. Obviously, big favorites here, even on the road. Ever since that matchup with the Steelers, have looked like a completely different team. So that being said, Josh Allen at $12,800 is somebody I am willing to roster on the slate. Obviously comes with quite a bit of cost right there, but again, somebody who has true 25, 30-point upside. So definitely garnering ownership. I am projected right now for over 70% ownership at the flex spot. A little bit less popular at the captain slot than you'd expect. Typically we see guys in this range closer to 24, 25% ownership, but he's also extremely expensive. It's $19,200, so people aren't necessarily as comfortable spending up that much as they would be on other slates. In terms of Ryan Tannehill, I like going there as well. Again, we're expecting them to be playing from behind. We'll talk about a few of the game flows later on that I expect to happen, and most of them involve Ryan Tannehill playing from behind. So Tannehill, I don't hate on this slate at all. You can see I have him projected for 18.2 points. So nothing close to Allen's 22.2 or anything like that. But in terms of point per dollar, you can see he's actually a better play than Josh Allen. So in cash games, I definitely like playing Ryan Tannehill. I like trying to fit both quarterbacks into my lineup. I think both of them go out there and have 20 plus point performances. Definitely garnering some ownership, though. He's not being overlooked by any means. If he was closer to 40, 50% ownership, he'd be one of my favorite plays in the entire slate. But definitely still garnering a little bit of attention. Perhaps it'd be smarter to use him at the captain slot, single-digit ownership in that category, but not somebody I'm prioritizing at captain, just somebody I'm trying to squeeze in as a flex play, just because I think he has a relatively high floor. Let's hop over to some of my running back options for this slate. You see Derrick Henry's obviously going to be a good play on this slate. The issue is he's at $11,400, and if you're trying to play both quarterbacks and go to Derrick Henry, you're going to have a really hard time making the rest of your lineup. So he's probably somebody I'm going to have less than the field of. You can see him being owned right now in 41.4% of people's flex spots. Could honestly end up coming in closer to 55, even 60% ownership. Would not be surprised to see that at all. And then at the captain slot, nearly 15% ownership as well. So it's not somebody I hate on this slate. Obviously, projecting very well, nearly 20 points in terms of a raw projection. Just don't like the price tag. Just don't love the ownership there. So somebody I'll have in my pool. I doubt I'll have much ownership leverage on him. A few other running backs I would at least consider. I'd consider Zach Moss just because of his red zone upside. Somebody who is getting a ton of touches when they're on the goal line, also getting a ton of touches out of the backfield when they're in the red zone. The reason why they're using Moss is when they have him in the game, they're really hard to predict. They're a team that can run the ball effectively with Moss. Moss is also really effective out of the backfield. But Devin Singletary doesn't have quite the same type of well-rounded mindset. Somebody who's a little bit smaller, not as good of a blocker. So adding Moss to the mix makes him a little bit more unpredictable, and they've seen a lot of success doing so. So I expect that to continue here for the rest of the year. Matt Breida, if you wanted to take an absolute stab here, a complete shot in the dark, Matt Breida at $200 could see 4 or 5 touches in this game. He could end up being the Travis Homer from last game's game on Sunday Night Football. Again, doesn't have to do much to pay off that $200 price tag. And if you end up spending up for both quarterbacks, if you're really trying to squeeze in somebody like Derrick Henry, you might have to go to somebody like that to make that happen. Let's talk about a few of the wide receivers. Stephon Diggs, probably my favorite play on the entire slate. Completely mispriced there at $9,600. He's a lock for me on this slate. You can see right now only garnering about 28.6% ownership. He's somebody that I'm taking a stand on tonight and just locking into my lineups. I have no problem doing that. Again, it's $9,600. That is a complete misprice. For him to only be $1,000 more than Amino Sanders is just complete robbery. It makes no sense. Obviously nearly an exactly 4.7 point difference between the two. Stephon Diggs is even a better point per dollar play. It's actually not even close. So really like him at the captain slot. We're going to talk about that towards the end of this live stream. We'll talk about some of my favorite targets at the captain, but he's definitely who makes that short list for me. By the way, any guys, if you have any questions in the chat, go ahead and put them down in the chat. I'll make sure to get to them at any point here. James says, do you do regular fantasy advice? Absolutely. So that's something I do here on the channel. I don't make content for it just because it's very similar to my DFS content. Obviously, the guys I have projected highly in that realm are going to do well in regular fantasy. But if you have any regular fantasy questions, just go ahead and let me know. More than willing to answer them, whether it's matchups, deciding between two players, whether it's deciding who to pick up on the waiver wire. Just let me know and I'll get it for you. So I'm back into these wide receivers. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in chat. I'll get to them when I see them. So Amino Sanders, I'm not playing him tonight. Again, it comes down to opportunity cost. Stephon Diggs is just a much better play on paper, much better play in terms of ownership as well. You can see Sanders still being relatively owned, almost 22% right there. He's not going to make my pool. It's just well overpriced for the actual type of player that he is. Sure, he's had a great start to this year, but not somebody I'm prioritizing in my lineups. Somebody I'd like playing a whole lot more is A.J. Brown. So obviously only priced at $7,800 because of the injury concerns. He is still questionable as of this point. So need to make sure that he's actually suiting up for tonight. But at that kind of price tag, he doesn't really have to do much to pay off. You can see he's actually one of my higher point per dollar plays on the slate, especially for one of these stud tier options. No one has a higher point per dollar play on him on the entire slate in this stud tier. So A.J. Brown, relatively high floor. If he goes out there, he plays every snap, he's going to score at least 15 fantasy points, that kind of thing. But somebody who has true 25, 30-point upside, if he ends up being the optimal captain, you're obviously going to have him. So I don't hate playing A.J. Brown here at all. I think that the game script works for him as well. And we're expecting him to play from behind in most instances. And somebody who's a deep play threat, somebody's also good in terms of PPR production. Is going to get plenty of screen passes, that kind of thing, to bolster those stats. Don't hate going to A.J. Brown at all there. Julio Jones, it's a nice price tag, right? He's only $1,200 less than A.J. Brown, but A.J. Brown's already been priced down. So when you look at it on a comparative basis, maybe Julio Jones not the best play on the slate, but when we take a look at the slate as a whole, it is a very good value right there. You can see I'm projected for 15.1 points, so very similar value in terms of point per dollar. I'm probably trying to squeeze in at least one of these two wide receivers, Brown or Julio Jones, into every lineup that I make. May even have both of them in lineups together. So obviously just need the salary to do that kind of thing, just because I like people like Josh Allen, Ryan Tannehill so much. But definitely people that I am prioritizing at the wide receiver position. Same thing with Cole Beasley. You guys saw my video from earlier on in the week where I talked about some of my favorite core plays. Really like Cole Beasley just because we see similar production numbers from him and Emmanuel Sanders, at least on a per snap basis. Just a little bit of volatility that's gone Sanders' way to this point. So a $3,200 difference in terms of their prices. And you can see I actually have Cole Beasley projected for more points here. And a lot of that just comes down to bounce back opportunity, also comes down to volatility in general, right? These guys are playing either above or below their average median scores and are due for some regression. And in Cole Beasley's pace, he's been playing below his standard baseline scores to this point. Somebody who's been a little bit robbed of production. Obviously he's the number 3 wide receiver for this team behind Sanders. But somebody who should see a good uptick in terms of his production sometime over the next month. Chester Rogers, he was only relevant just because A.J. Brown and Julio Jones weren't playing. We saw some production in their absence. So obviously if A.J. Brown doesn't play tonight, Chester Rogers might be somebody I'd consider. But at this point, I don't have him playing very many snaps in this game. You know, this team loves to go to 2 tight end sets a whole lot more than they love going to 3 wide receiver sets. So don't really love him in this situation. If I'm going to try and spend down at wide receiver, it's going to be for Gabriel Davis. So you can see I have him there at $2,000. Projected for 10.5 points, which makes him great in terms of point per dollar. But anytime you're dealing with a value play, you always have to question whether they have the upside in terms of GPP. And with Davis, you do, right? You have a guy who has shown the ability to catch deep balls, somebody who last year, especially Josh Allen, showed a lot of trust in the playoffs. And to this point of the year, hasn't seen much production. So he is the number 4 wide receiver on this team, but this is also one of the best passing offenses in the NFL. So it's a little bit more expensive than most number 4 wide receivers tend to be, but somebody I'm willing to take a risk on just because we've seen the production in the past, even if it hasn't happened here in 2021. Marcus Johnson, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, they are not plays for me. You know, same kind of situation as Rodgers. They saw playing time when they ended up both missing games, but with both of them expected to play tonight, I think Marcus Johnson and Westbrook-Ikhine might not even see the field. They might not even play 1 snap tonight. So you say I haven't projected at the very least, 3.5, 4 points. But I think that's even being a little bit nice, being a little bit, I can't think of the word, not opposite of strict. I can't think of the word off the top of my head. I'm a little bit lenient, right, with those projections there. Josh Reynolds, if I was going to take anybody from this team that's really cheap, anybody who's not going to see a lot of snaps, it's going to be Reynolds just because he's also somebody who puts in work in special teams, right? Somebody who takes a lot of returns, is relatively athletic. Sometimes they use setup runs for Josh Reynolds. Sometimes they use setup screens for him. So at the very least, he's going to see some playing time. So you can see as of right now, still projected around that 3.4 point mark, but a huge difference in terms of his price, right? You're talking $400 versus $1,400. Definitely like going to Reynolds a little bit more than these other 2 options, but you can see Reynolds not a core play for me. It's somebody who kind of on, right? I'm going to have him in lineups if I need to save that salary. So somebody kind of like just Matt Breida that you're hoping they somehow end up scoring a touchdown. In Breida's case, you're hoping that somebody like Zach Moss ends up like getting hurt, getting like a little bit of a bruise, a stinger or something like that. And Breida ends up being the goal line backer. With Reynolds, you hope that one of those setup runs for him ends up going for 40, 50 yards. It's not very likely to come through, but in a GPP format, especially on Showdown, you at least need to play people like that because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, last night, did anyone expect DJ Dallas to be the optimal play at running back? A few slates ago, we saw backup tight ends scoring like Donald Parham Jr. That ended up being optimal that nobody even knew was going to play. I mean, this kind of stuff happens. It tends to happen a lot more often than we think too. So somebody I'll at least be putting in a lineup or 2 just as a pure flyer play right there. Getting to some of our tight ends I like. So don't hate Dawson Knox, right? He's been good to this point in the year, but he's also seen a massive price increase. He's like $4,500 to $5,500, almost every other slate on this year, but now he's $7,600. And if we just take a direct comparison, somebody like AJ Brown or even like Julio Jones, he's projected much lower than those guys at the same, if not, a higher price. So for me, not somebody I'm prioritizing on the slate, especially because he's expected to be owned in over 20% of lineups. If it was somewhere closer to 7 or 8%, he was somebody who people were just taking a few chances on, a few shots on at the very best, I'd probably be a lot more enthusiastic about playing Dawson Knox, but just question the upside, right? The ownership's there, so it's not like we're getting leverage at that position. And somebody, again, he's had a few ceiling games to this point of the year, but did we really expect that from Dawson Knox? I think they were a little bit more of an outlier than the trend. In 2020, he didn't make much of a fantasy impact at all. So not that I think that he's going to be a bad play for the rest of the year or anything like that. Just kind of question why he's being owned or why there's as much steam behind him as there is. Let's talk about Anthony Firkser. I don't hate going there. It's a decent price there at $4,000. You can see a relatively similar projection to somebody like Knox, just a little bit less because he's in an offense that doesn't pass it as often. It's not in as efficient of an offense, but huge price difference, right? You can see the point per dollar metric right here, a lot better than somebody like Dawson Knox. And with that $3,600 difference, you can do a ton. You just have a lot of flexibility with your lineup at that point. So like going to Anthony Firkser is a little bit of a value play. Michael Pruitt, somebody at the tight end position who you really need to save some salary, just like somebody like Matt Breida, just like a Josh Reynolds, you can end up going to him. The thing I like about Pruitt is that we know he's going to play snaps. He's the number 2 tight end for this team. No one uses 2 tight ends more than the Tennessee Titans. They love to run the ball with those 2 tight ends. They love to use them as little gadget plays, right? So Pruitt, a little bit dependent on the touchdown. Actually, I'd say very dependent on going out and getting a touchdown. But at $600, he at the very least is going to have some opportunity. Tommy Sweeney, I don't want anything of. The guy hardly plays for the Bills. Sometimes they even use no tight end sets. So Dawson Knox doesn't even end up playing every snap in games, let alone somebody like Tommy Sweeney who only comes in on blocking downs. Let's talk about some of the defenses. I'm not huge on these defenses just because we expect this to be a relatively high-scoring game. The over-under is 53.5 points. The price tags on these defenses aren't great either. Let's see, $4,800 for the Bills, $3,600 for the Titans. I might have the Bills in just a few lineups just because Ryan Tannehill's definitely shown an ability to throw a lot of interceptions. But I'm not ecstatic about playing either. And then now for our kickers, you see Tyler Bass here at $3,400. You have Ryan Bullock at $3,200. Don't hate going to the kickers, right? Especially Tyler Bass. Bass has been one of the best kickers in the entire NFL. It's also only $3,400, which is a decent price for a kicker. Also a relatively high-scoring game, right? So if Bass goes out there, ends up kicking 3 or 4 field goals, can very well end up being an optimal play on the slate. Ryan Bullock, obviously an older veteran, right? Somebody who's filling in for an injured kicker at this point. He's $3,200. A little bit less bullish about playing him because obviously he's playing for the lower total game. Also not one of the better kickers in the NFL. We know that Tyler Bass is going to be extremely accurate no matter what field he's at because he does it over there at Buffalo where they have some of the hardest wind to kick in the entire NFL, probably second to only Pittsburgh Stadium. Pittsburgh Stadium, I don't know if you guys know this, it is by far the lowest made percentage of field goals in the NFL. It's like not even close. I believe the average is right around 74, 75%. In Heinz Field, it's right around 61, 62%. The only guy who seems to have figured it out is Chris Boswell, who averages well over 80% accuracy at Heinz Field. But again, that's his home field. He's used to, kicking in that stadium. Same kind of issues over here in Tennessee. It's an open air stadium. Again, we looked at the weather before. We're not looking at crazy wind gusts or anything like that, but it tends to be a little bit more tricky than players give it credit for. So I like Tyler Bass's situation, not as huge on somebody like Ryan Bullock. So what I'm going to do now, guys, is go through a few of the game flows that I expect for tonight. This is by far the most important part of the video, in my opinion. Because obviously on this page right here, you see a median projection. So we ran simulations on this, 10,000, 100,000 times, whatever it may be. These are the median projections that we're going to get. And in reality, we know that never ends up happening. Anytime you have a median projection, it's just telling you part of the story. If you're going to create efficient showdown lineups that actually have a chance to take down first place, you have to think of a script for the game. You have to imagine what type of game flow situations we're likely to see. So let's talk about a few of them. Let's talk about the obvious one. I always start with the obvious game script here. It would be a blowout by the Buffalo Bills, right? Bills have been extremely efficient to this point of the year. They've completely stormhoused some teams out there. They've also shown a little bit of vulnerability. So it's not like I think that this is a complete guarantee to happen tonight, but I definitely think in most situations, you're going to see the Bills get out to a hot start on offense, probably hand it to this Titans team. In that type of game flow, obviously that Buffalo offense going to be a high scoring team, a team that you want to have a lot of exposure to, but even more so as a buyback, you're probably looking at the wide receiving options for the Titans, right? In a game where the Titans end up getting ahead, they're going to be a little bit more run-centric like they have been all year. But if they're getting blown out, they're not going to have the ability to do that, right? So you're looking at Jerry McNichols probably getting some targets out of the backfield, somebody who isn't going to see a ton of playing time if they're playing from ahead. But if they're playing from behind, McNichols becomes an interesting scenario just because he's a better blocker. He's more explosive out of the backfield as a wide receiver than Derrick Henry. You start talking about some of the wide receivers I'd love A.J. Brown. Already love A.J. Brown on the slate. But if we're assuming that the Titans are going to get killed, hell, I really love myself some A.J. Brown, right? He's going to be catching a ton of targets down the field. They're going to be just trying to air it out to him. So we'd see a little bit of a boost in production. A few other people would be looking at the kickers, right? If there's a huge blowout or something like that, the Buffalo kicker is going to get a boost just because they're not going to be quite as aggressive to try and score touchdowns if they're ahead. They're going to be more willing to settle for field goals. And oftentimes when we see a huge lead for a team, they end up kicking 3 or 4 field goals in those games. So Tyler Bass, don't hate playing him in that type of situation. Obviously, you'd need Josh Allen in that lineup, potentially even at captain if it's an onslaught, and probably Ryan Tannehill in your lineup as well. He's going to get a lot of yardage and garbage time, that sort of thing. Let's talk about a more interesting game script. And we've been right on the more interesting game script 2 out of the last 4 times. It's very obvious in this situation too. It's like, what if the Titans go out and have a great game? They haven't shown that here in 2021, but we saw it in 2020. They were one of the more efficient offenses in the NFL. People before the season were singing praise about them. They brought in Julio Jones. They brought in most of their starters on offense. They were never a great defense, but they got away with it. They were very explosive on offense and able to pull through. We haven't seen that to this point, but who says that doesn't turn around this week? And I think that's a very interesting scenario, the type of play. In that type of scenario, Derrick Henry becomes very intriguing. I mean, if they're playing from ahead, you're looking at Derrick Henry getting 20 to 25 carries. And while the Buffalo Bills have been really good against the run to this point in the year, they completely shut down Najee Harris in week 1. They've shut down quite a few running backs they've played since. And again, a lot of that has been to do with their offense, right? They've gone out to such a lead that teams can't run against them. But there's definitely a scenario here where Derrick Henry goes out and absolutely bull rushes them, because we haven't seen that defense tested at all against the run. Again, just teams haven't had the ability to run it against them. And Derrick Henry's just, he's built different. I think that's the best way to explain it. The guy just runs you over, runs you into the ground, pancakes you. I definitely think there's a scenario where he goes out and has a very good game. So in this type of situations, I'm probably playing Derrick Henry at captain, probably trying to mix in at least 1 or 2 of the passing options from the Titans, either Julio Jones, an AJ Brown, that kind of thing. Most likely Ryan Tannehill. And in terms of buybacks, this is where it gets very interesting, right? You're looking at Josh Allen for sure. You're looking at probably Stephon Diggs and somebody like Cole Beasley, because in that type of game, the Bills aren't going to go away. I mean, we know they're going to get their fill on offense. We know they're going to go out there and get their at least 20 points, that kind of thing. So you're looking at just overall ball catchers and just throwers in that game, just tons of fantasy points. Again, probably Derrick Henry at captain, or at the very least, somebody like AJ Brown. And lastly, let's talk about what other game script we talk about? Okay, I like this one a lot too. So this is a little bit more of a contrarian game script, right? So almost everyone in the industry, myself included, I want to make that apparent, thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. Everyone thinks that this is going to be the type of game where you're going to see 55, 60 points scored, that kind of thing. And while I'd love for that to be the case, that's what I expect here. Especially when we look at the offensive metrics for both teams, they're relatively high volume teams, high pace teams as well. There's an opportunity here where this turns into a running fest, right? Derrick Henry, one of the highest volume rushers in the NFL, somebody who's capable of taking 30, 35 carries in a game. Now, on the other side of things, while you have a very explosive offense, who's to say that they don't change things up this week? I mean, they have a couple good running backs over on that side of things. An O-line that's been really clicking to this point of the year. If we end up seeing a lower scoring game, I'm definitely trying to target the running backs a little bit more than usual. Probably not playing Ryan Tannehill in this type of situations, just because he doesn't have the rushing upside of somebody like a Josh Allen. Josh Allen obviously probably going to put up 40, 50 yards rushing in this game, which gives him a very high floor. So Derrick Henry would be an obvious play in that type of situation. Hell, he could even look to one of the defenses if he wanted to. Probably not my favorite type of play just because of the upside there. A few other options. Cole Beasley is a very good option in a low-scoring game just because he does a lot of his work with PPR, right? Somebody who's running a lot of the shorter routes. He's capable of putting up 8 or 9 catches in a game, so you'd like to see that. Stephon Diggs, also very good in PPR. Not only good at catching a lot of balls, but also really explosive. So that's why he ends up being an elite wide receiver, not just somebody that we like in PPR like a Cole Beasley. On the other side of things, for the Titans, a few players that become a little bit interesting to me in a low-scoring game. I mean, first and foremost, AJ Brown. We know he's going to get the most targets of anyone on this team. And at $7,800, you're really just trying to go for the highest point per dollar plays on the slate at this point. I'm just trying to get the best raw score. That's probably about it in that type of situation. I mean, you could fill in a kicker at that point, right? If it ends up being a low-scoring game, one of the ways that can end up being lower scoring than we expect is teams aren't able to convert in the red zone, right? They get down to win the 20-yard line. These defenses aren't good at letting up yards, right? They let up some of the most yards of anyone in the NFL. That doesn't mean that they let up a ton of touchdowns. So these teams could end up letting up a lot of field goals. So I wouldn't hate that in that situation either. So that's all we're going to have for this stream here, guys. As always, really appreciate you guys stopping by and enjoying the content and whatnot. If you guys haven't already liked this stream, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, make sure you guys go ahead and do so. Not only do we post Showdown content on here for the NFL, we have main slate content for every week's DFS contest. We also have PGA Tour content as well as UFC content. So pretty much something for everybody on here on the channel. And of course, all of it data-based. If you guys haven't already joined the Patreon page, I'm going to put a link down in the description for you guys to go ahead and join. That's how you get access to all the projections you saw in this video. So again, not just for the Showdown slates, have content for all of the NFL games and a Patreon page for my PGA Tour projections. So if you're looking for that kind of stuff, you've got it on there too. But good luck with all of your lineups for tonight.